One of my favorite parts of my planning is when I walk down the hall to fill up my water bottle, take a break, get some hydration, stretch my legs. As I walk by each classroom, I get to hear these little tiny snippets of what's going on. And I find myself thinking, oh, I would love to learn about that. Or that sounds really interesting. Or those kids sound like they're having a good time. And every time it happens, I found myself thinking it would be really cool to take those things and put them together in poem format. Those ideas that I've kind of eavesdropped, I think that'd make a really cool poem. And so it would be a good idea to kind of get a pulse of the school, what's going on, but also as a way to kind of pull kids into poetry. Let's be honest, a lot of times when you tell kids that they're going to be learning about poetry, it's like, oh, lots of groans and moans. They don't like poetry. And I always say, well, what poems have you read? Oh, so somebody told you that you're supposed to not like poetry. Well, I'm here to change your mind. Poetry is everywhere. It could be a really poignant tweet, a caption on something. You really just have to pay attention. I decided to take this idea of eavesdropping poetry and use it to introduce poetry to my seniors. I gave them a handout, which I've included. It's very simplistic. It's not necessary. They can just use loose leaf if you wanted to. But then they worked in partners. What they decided to do was break up the school because we are organized by department. The kids kind of went to different wings. And I told them, walk down the hall, get to about the door, pause, listen for a second, write down what you hear, move on. So I said, you have 10 minutes, come back when you're finished. They came back and had all of their things that they overheard. We took a minute to kind of share some of the crazier things that we heard. Then the work begins. What I had them do was take those lines that they have eavesdropped and see how do you need to put them together. Do you have some sort of theme that you could maybe develop? Can you break it into stanzas? Do you want to go with the stream of consciousness? It was really up to them. Once they got their order down, then I let them decide, do you need to add transitions? Do you need to edit some words out? What kind of punctuation do you want to use? Once they had that pretty well situated, then I directed their attention to the first and last part of the handout. And so I just had it grayed out before they left. I said, don't worry about those. Those will make sense later on. And so once they had everything pretty well set, I had them decide what the theme of their poem was. It doesn't have to be eavesdropping. It doesn't have to be, being a creep, but they then introduced that theme in a line or two at the very beginning. And then at the very end, they developed a universal truth, some lesson about life that they could learn from these lines. And then I was like, oh, one last thing, make sure you give it a name. Very important. Don't forget about it. Always read the title. Even if it's sonnet 118, that at least tells you that there were 117 sonnets that came before it. They did that. We shared. We were all really, really impressed with the things that they came up with. That was a great springboard into poetry. They saw that these random things that they could hear walking down a hall. Imagine how cool it would be if you did this during class change. That's kind of the way that I did it the first time. You could also do this if you're looking for an alternate way to do it. We're like, oh man, I already started my poetry unit. Fine. Go through, teach them everything that you need to about poetry, and then use this as a culminating activity at the end. It can absolutely work anywhere in the unit. Another way that I did it was I had a really small class and they always seemed really nervous to talk, even though they always had great ideas. They just didn't really believe me. After they gathered their information, they came back to the room. I gave each group a sentence strip. It could be a piece of paper. It doesn't matter what it is, but I had them write down the 2 favorite things that they overheard. I'm like, just write it on there. Great. So we have them all, throw them in a stack in the middle. And then we did the activity as I described before, but they had to do it as a group. Of course, for me, I loved overhearing the conversation. I was eavesdropping on their conversation, if you will. But as they were moving things, it was kind of like, oh, if we do this, it could build to this. Instead of having that whole line in there, we could use it as an appositive phrase. It would make more sense if we set this off with dashes. My English teacher heart is about ready to explode because these are all the things that we have been talking about, and their convincing each other in poetry form of what needs to happen. I hope that you decide to try eavesdropping poetry with your class. I've included a sample that I wrote that I thought, maybe the kids would be like, oh, can you show us a model? They love models, and they didn't need it, but I have one and you can have one. But I would definitely suggest the next time you're on your planning and you are walking to the water fountain to fill up your Stanley, that you take a second to kind of listen to what's going on in the classrooms around you and write your own eavesdropping poem. You will be amazed at the poetry that is around you every day.